Welcome to GC 204, Lecture 5, Memory. Introduction. In this lecture, we are going to learn about memory, process of memory, memory aid, long and short-term memory, thinking and approaches to thinking. This is because learning may turn into futile exercise if what is learned is not utilized soon or later. For the material learned to be used, it must remain in the mind stored up. 2. For use when the need arises. The ability or power of the mind to store the past experiences of learning and utilize them at a later stage is known as memory. Without good memory, man will not be able to retain previous learning. Objectives. At the end of this lecture, students should be able to 1. Define memory. 2. Explain the process of memory. 3. Explain long and short-term memory. 4. Discuss thinking and approaches to thinking. Meaning and definition of memory. This is the intellectual process of storing and later retrieving what individual has learned. In other words, there are two interrelated functions performed in memory. 1. The conservation and retention of knowledge, skills, and past experiences. And 2. The ability to recall or recognize what have been retained. Stages of learning. There are 3 basic stages in effective learning. These are acquisition, retention, and recall. 1. Acquisition. This is the first stage in learning. It is the perception stage, that is, getting messages from the environment meant to be interpreted in the central nervous system, CNS. After the image outside of individual is made available for interpretation in the nervous system, it is possible one forgets it immediately. 2. Retention. This retention is broken into 4 sub-stages, and at this stage, individual learner is trying to consolidate the information acquired initially and to store it for use. Stage 1. In an attempt not to forget, the brain engages in rehearsing music revibration. For example, there might be some pictures. Take 2. There might be some picture flashes in one's brain, so that one will not forget it. While this is going on, the short-term memory will open and the new image will go inside it for deposition. Stage 2. This is known as short-term retention, STR. The material will be in the brain for about 20 seconds before it can be forgotten. Ability to retain it depends on relevance or value attached to the materials. Miller 1956 says short-term memory, STM, contains 7 plus 2, that is, the magical number 7. The brain at any given time cannot contain more than 9 and not less than 5 materials, after which the material moves out and goes to consolidation stage. Stage 3. The first process in stage 3 is called catabolization. New images are broken down into tiny materials, smaller particles. After this, there is anabolism, which means building up into a solid whole. When the two are completed, the material would have been refined or consolidated. The image is now deposited into long-term memory, LTM, or deep freezer. The LTM does not accept any material or image that has not been consolidated. Stage 5. The first stage is categorization. Psychologists are of the opinion that any material which arouses individual brain when it is received will be better catabolized than the image that does not arouse the brain. Thus, anabolization will also be badly done. Decay in the LTM can be quickly forgotten. The material that is well refined creates impact, which will arouse the brain better, or it will always be recalled. Materials that are better retained easily and recalled, they stay longer in the LCM. Thus, under teaching and lecture situation, the teacher should try to plan his work sequentially. Before the material goes to LTM, the brain must categorize it. This refers to the level of importance of image placed in the right place. The end of the second stage of learning thus gives the child time to digest and consolidate facts in class. 3. Recall. This is the third and final stage in learning. In an attempt to recall, the brain sends messages to LTM. For any stored materials to be recalled, the following 4 stages must be passed through. A. Stage 1. Sorting out in order of importance from the ideas of knowledge previously stored. B. Stage 2. Recognition of the needed material. Thus, something will be done to the material because by now it is encoded. C. Stage 3. Decoding. Encoded materials are now made once more raw. They become meaningless to the brain again, but meaningful to the outside world. D. Stage 4. To recall, one must be in a relaxed form, otherwise one will forget or not remember what ought to be remembered. It is necessary that one relax well during examination to be able to recall better. Types of learning. There are several ways by which learning takes place. Some of them are discussed below. 1. Stimulus-response learning or association learning. A Russian psychologist called I.P. Pavlov propounded this type of learning. He found that saliva flowed from dogs' mouths not only when food was placed in its front, but also when the dog heard the approaching footsteps of the person bringing food. The normal flow of saliva when food is in the mouth is known as unconditioned stimulus and response. When the dog is able to identify bell ring and footsteps, then learning has taken place. This is referred to as conditioned stimulus and response. Teachers should be able to present stimulus to elicit a response by reinforcing desired behavior as quickly and frequently as possible, like through the use of praises. Teachers should help associate new facts with old knowledge while teaching in the classroom. This makes children feel at home with the new facts. 2. Trial and error. Edward Thorndike carried out this learning method in 1896 on animals. With this method, we tend to put aside those activities that are not successful and reinforce those that are successful. In this method of learning, the person tries to solve a problem or overcome a difficulty by making a number of efforts and the use of various approaches to solve the problem. This type of learning is not the best because a lot of time is wasted on unsuccessful activities. 3. Learning by imitation. This is an act of copying behavior from somebody. It is a quick way of learning opinions, beliefs, and behaviors, which are often adopted quickly from others whom one admires. For instance, a sizable number of children's behaviors begin by the imitation of others. The teacher should be a good example of what he teaches. More practically, imitations come from demonstration, showing how some things are done effectively. 4. Learning by insight. The term insight refers to solving a problem through understanding the relationship between the various parts of the problem. Insight often occurs suddenly when individuals look at a problem for some time and then suddenly grasps the solution. With this method, insight comes when one looks at learning materials objectively. The discovery comes as a flash of understanding with expression of surprise. Aha! With adults and older children, the process of finding solutions should be a purely mental activity. With younger children, it must be concrete or visible. Teachers can do this by assisting their students to organize in their minds the new learning material. 5. Memorization. This method of learning is usually referred to as learning by heart or rote learning. Most children can memorize long texts and poems. There are two simple ways of aiding memorization in learning. A. Learning as a whole. When a student sees what he is trying to memorize as a meaningful whole rather than component parts, the task of learning is made easier. B. Pattern learning. This is an arrangement that is orderly. If the material that is to be memorized is arranged in some orderly way, it gives it form or makes it more easily understood and easier to remember. Rote learning. Rote learning, according to Ausubel, 1968, is the opposite of meaningful learning. It is arbitrary, verbatim, and easily forgotten. Most rote learning is also non-conceptual. Thus, specific pieces of information must be memorized in order to be learned. For rote learning to be recalled, the recall situation must be highly similar to the one under which the learning originally occurred. Propositional learning. This involves combining or seeing the relationships between two or more lesser events or concepts and making a generalization that includes the properties of all. When concepts are restated into rules, principles, generalizations, or hypotheses, propositional learning has taken place. Discovery learning. There may be occasions when the learner must combine ideas, concepts, or rules in order to learn, but these are combinations or already learned materials and not the discovery of relationships. In contrast, in discovery learning, learners are not given the principal content of what is being learned. They must discover it before they can internalize the learning. This discovery results from the learner's active engagement in rearrangement, reorganization, or transformation of materials. Overlearning. Overlearning can be referred to as practicing a learned response after it is presumably mastered. The practice of learned response tends to be retained for longer periods of time than those not used after mastery. Memory process, encoding, storage, and retrieval. For any particular learning to be retrieved or brought back into memory, there are three processes that take place in the brain. They are referred to as the act of encoding, storing, and retrieving. For us to understand this better, individuals shall employ the use of a word, psychology. The word psychology, when initially perceived, is received in a raw form as a neutral item. It is subsequently sent to the central nervous system, CNS, through the afferent nerve fibers for interpretation through cognitive restructuring, which employs the use of previous experience in giving meaning to new items. The word thus becomes meaningful to one. This system of processing information into a meaningful entity is technically referred to as encoding. The sensory register. Information can be held for a very brief time in the sensory channels themselves. This storage function of the sensory channels is called the sensory register. Most information briefly held in the sensory register is lost. What has been briefly stored simply decays from the register. Types of memory. It is assumed that people have at least 3 types of memory systems. These include a sensory register for taking in perceptions, a short-term of working memory, and a long-term memory. Sensory register. There are lots of stimuli constantly perceived in the environment by individual receptors. Receptors are the components of sensory system for seeing, hearing, tasting, smelling, and feeling. The sensory register for only about 1/4 of a second. In this brief time, registers the patterns of neural activity produced when stimuli reach the receptors. There is the chance to select information for further processing. Reitman, Sigmund, and Sanford, 1979. Because the sensory register holds everything briefly, there is the chance to make sense of it. To organize it through perception. Lindsay and Neumann, 1977. This is necessary since there is much more information available in the sensory register that can possibly enter the next system, the short-term memory. Instead of perceiving everything, people pay attention to certain features of the total content in the sensory register and look for patterns. Short-term memory. Short-term memory is memory that holds information received from the sensory register for up to about 30 seconds, although the length of the retention depends on a number of factors. Short-term memory, in addition to its transient quality, also has a very limited storage capacity. This capacity is estimated to be about 7 items, plus or minus 2. Miller, 1956. What is the fate of information in short-term memory? Since the capacity of this memory stage is so small, much information stored here is lost because it is displaced by incoming items of information. Because it is lost, however, part of the information can be retrieved and used. Studies of retrieval from short-term memory. Sternberg, 1966-1975, showed that individuals rapidly scan through short-term memory when searching for a piece of information. To prevent forgetting, most people rehearse or repeat the information mentally until it is no longer needed. As long as one focuses on and repeats the information, it can be maintained in short-term memory indefinitely through rehearsal. It may appear that a memory system with a 20 to 30 second time limit is not very useful, but without this system, individuals would forget what they have read in the first part of a sentence before they finish the last few words. This would make understanding of sentences very difficult. Yet, it would be a disadvantage to remember permanently every sentence individual ever read. Finding a particular bit of information in all that sea of knowledge would be impossible. So, it is helpful to have a system that allows temporary storage. Short-term memory is limited not only in the length of time. Unrehearsed information can be retained, but also in the number of items that can be held at one time. It appears that only about 5 to 9 separate items can be held in short-term memory at one time. Rehearsal. The process of rehearsal consists of keeping items of information in the center of attention, perhaps by repeating them silently or aloud. The amount of rehearsal given to items is important in the transfer of information from short-term to long-term memory. Rondons, 1971. In general, the more an item is rehearsed, the more likely it is to become part of long-term memory. However, In the last few years, other experiments have indicated that the sheer amount of rehearsal may be less important than the ways in which the information is rehearsed. Just going over and over what is to be remembered, called maintenance rehearsal, does not necessarily succeed in transferring it to long-term memory. Craig and Watkins, 1973. What is known as elaborative rehearsal is more likely to succeed. Elaborative rehearsal involves giving the material organization and meaning as it is being rehearsed. It is an active rehearsal process, not just the passive process of repetition. Long-term memory. The time span over which information can be stored in long-term memory cannot be stated precisely. Long-term memories may last for days, months, years, or even a lifetime. Also, unlike short-term memory, the storage capacity of long-term memory has no known limits. Some theorists believe that there is no true forgetting from long-term memory. According to this view, once information is stored in long-term memory, it is there for good. When individuals seem to forget, it is because individuals have trouble retrieving or getting access to what has been stored. In other words, the information is still there. People just cannot get it because it has not been stored in an organized fashion, or because people are not searching for it in the right part of the memory storehouse. Other studies of memory maintain that individuals forget because of the confusion and interference produced by new things which have been learned and put into long-term memory. Long-term memory contains words, sentences, ideas, concepts, and the life experiences people have had. Quillian, 1966. Take 2, 66. Turvin, 1972. Memory aid. This refers to several factors or strategies that seem to be important in learning new information if it is to be retrieved easily when needed. Among them are 1. Elaboration, which involves adding meaning by connecting one bit of new information with other association or with existing knowledge. The connection occurs when the new information is incorporated into propositional networks. One way to elaborate new information and make it easier to remember is to connect the verbal information with a visual image. This is often done automatically. 2. Organization. Another memory aid is organization, which is related to elaboration. Material that is well organized is easier to learn and remember than bits and pieces of information. Placing concepts in an organizational framework, such as a hierarchical structure, is one way to elaborate on the information. 3. Context. This is a third factor that influences learning remembering. Evidently, certain aspects of the physical and emotional context of material are learned along with the information and become part of the propositional networks. Later, if people try to remember the information, it will be easier if the context is similar. This has been demonstrated in the laboratory by having students learn material in one type of room and then take a test in similar or a different room. Performance was found to be better in the similar room. Smith et al., 1978. Summary. In this lecture, you have learned about memory, why people usually forget what they have learned in the past, and how the student can be assisted by the teacher to remember or recall previous learning. End of lecture 5. Thank you for listening.